Very much. We're going to begin our afternoon session, and our afternoon session will be dealing with the somewhat thorny topic of early childhood. I shouldn't say thorny, it's more intractable. It's an intractable issue that we have. But the one thing that I do want to say before we begin that might, in some respects, help inform the discussion, or at least inform why we feel that early childhood is so important, is that a lot of the data that is reflected in the reading materials suggests that demographics play too great a role in one's destiny. It determines whether they'll be in a position to take advantage of the STEM instruction or any other type of instruction. I mentioned STEM because Alex made a point of it this morning of talking about how if we don't capture our kids early, it's too late to train them later. And I think that Ms. Thomas Manning also made the point that we can't train people for college in high school. It has to begin at age 3. So we want to debunk the notion that demographics determines one's destiny. So we're going to begin at the beginning with early childhood, and that panel is going to be moderated by our own Tanny Crane, who has devoted much of her lifetime and resources to early childhood education. On our panel, we have our local education guru, Mr. Mark Rill, who is president and CEO of KidsOhio.org, and Ms. Sasheen Phillips, who is the Executive Director of Curriculum and Assessment of the Ohio Department of Education. And so, Tanny, with that introduction, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judge Marbley. And like our prior panelists, I'm bad at sitting. So I'm short enough, so I think I'll just stand up. But good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
This is no time for siestas after lunch, because this is a topic that many of us are passionate about. As I have become passionate about it, and as I look around the room, there are many on our commission, and I'm not going to name them all, but on our commission and around the room who have spent their professional lives being passionate about this subject and are doing so many good things in our community about it. So I am personally thankful to each and every one of you for doing that. So I'd just like to set the stage. We only have 2 hours, which is not nearly enough time. I could spend days talking about this and you would not enjoy that. But so similar to this morning's format, for the first hour, we will share some information with you. And then the second hour will be devoted to discussing as a commission. So I think that format works very well. So what is the end goal? The end goal could be a consensus for this commission on whether or not we want to pursue this topic as part of a recommendation to the mayor and to Council President Ginther. So we had a little bit of light reading. I counted 115 pages. Our resident expert, both Mark Rill and Sasheen Phillips, had the task of summarizing all the salient points for our discussion today, and they will be going through their 44 slide presentations in a rapid 20 minutes. So we'll see how that goes. Then we're going to move into a panel discussion with 2 very important people. They are professionals who together serve over 3,700 of our community's children in their centers. Who better to provide us insights about children in our community? We'll begin the conversation with those panelists with an understanding of just what do they do? Who do they serve? What are their goals? What are their challenges? What are their interactions with our school districts? What's their view of their role in the continuity of our children's education before kindergarten and through college and career? And what their view of the future is. So before I introduce Mark and Sasheen to give their overview, Now I'd like to just distill in a few minutes my perspective. With my small share of knowledge, which always makes one dangerous, that's my prerogative, I've got the microphone. So in 150 words or less, I have a few sound bites that I just like to share. I'd like to begin and end with a quote. And this first quote is from the Action for Children study on the Progress Made Ground Loss study that was recently released, and it's in our packet. The true impediment to success for children is lack of dollars to pay for quality care and education, especially for those who need it most. And I want to repeat that, especially for those who need it most. What we know from data collected recently from United Way's Columbus Kids program, over 2/3 of children in Columbus are living in households earning less than $20,000. Over 2/3. And more astounding, over 40% of Columbus's children are living in households earning less than $5,000. What we know, demand outstrips supply for early education slots by a 2-to-1 margin, and triple that for those slots in quality-rated centers. What we know, less than 2% of public expenditures support our youngest learners. We spend more on our prisoners. What we know, investments in early childhood development, especially for disadvantaged children, have a 10% return on investment per year, far exceeding the return on any later intervention. I would take that to the bank any day. And that information was studied by a Nobel laureate from the University of Chicago in economics, James Heckman. And what we know, quality early learning predicts higher rates of kindergarten readiness and predicts higher third-grade reading scores. It's been documented in research and through application in places like Cincinnati and in Cleveland and even here in Columbus. In fact, 89% of the children in Columbus City Schools pre-K are ready for kindergarten versus the total universe of kids in Columbus entering kindergarten, which is only 66%. So we have over 1/3 of our kids entering Columbus City Schools not prepared for kindergarten. And 40% of our Columbus City School kids are not passing the third-grade reading test. So my last quote from David Brooks, New York Times columnist who understands this research we've just talked about and you've read about. By age 5, it is possible to predict with depressing accuracy who will complete high school and college and who won't. We have an unprecedented opportunity as part of this commission to make a significant difference in the lives of children in our community. So I look forward to the conversation we'll have later with our United Way President, Janet Jackson. So now I would like to turn this over to meeting to Mark Reel and Sasheen Phillips, who have performed miracles. Because not only have they been supplying you with all this information, but then they've had to synthesize it to 44 slides, and they sent it out to all these early education experts in the room to try to fact check and get it back for today's presentation. So my hat off to the two of you, and I'll turn it over to Mark and Sasheen.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks to everyone in the room, particularly the early childhood leaders who've joined us this afternoon who work every day to improve the lives of young children. The thank you to our partners is the first slide, and they are listed, people who've helped us with this presentation. And we're going to cover quickly the agenda. We're going to give you an overview of need, and then more emphasis on early reading, and this is why Sasheen is here. She's an expert from the Ohio Department of Education. She's a key person in the state. Then quickly go through learning checkups, overview of child care, overview of preschool, some of the comments that Tanny made about investing in child care, and then some considerations that the Commission may want to consider as it moves forward. So we start with a demographic point, which is if we look back for the last decade, there are fewer children under age 6 in this. There are more children overall in Franklin County, but fewer children under age 6 in the central city. So you can look, for example, on the maps that you have on slide 4, that the Near East, for example, has 16% fewer children today than it did 10 years ago. By contrast, if you look at the dark green on the Northeast, this is on slide 4 that's in your packet, and you can see very significant increases. So one of the things to note, and this mirrors, if you turn to the next slide, slide 5, this mirrors the fact that central city neighborhoods lost population during the last 10 years, while outer belt neighborhoods grew. It grew more quickly, is a more exact way to put it. And this is an issue that the mayor is quite interested in, which is the population in Columbus neighborhoods served by suburban schools grew by 22% in the last decade. By contrast, neighborhoods served by Columbus City schools grew only by 5%. And we're seeing the same reflections in terms of births. Tanny mentioned the level of poverty. The poorest group of Americans are children under the age of 5. And so we point out on slide 6 that 48% of Columbus babies are born to unmarried parents. And that's simply a marker for poverty. Not every unmarried parent is poor, but most are. And 56% of babies were born to parents who did not have some form of private health insurance, so the births were paid for by Medicaid. And I do want to note here, Bart Anderson in his morning presentation pointed out this Help Me Grow program. The county and a number of you are involved, and last year over 2,500 families of new babies received a home visit. It used to be 5,000 3 years ago, but there is an effort underway to understanding that this is the way children arrive, that we need to beef up the help that they get. Slide 7 shows you the percentage of children under age 6 with income below the 125% of the poverty level. What does that mean in English? That's $18,000 for a family of 2. If you look at this map, you can see, for example, in the dark green area, that the Franklin neighborhood, which is the near west side abutting downtown, that 83% of children in that neighborhood live in a family. And even if you had a mother and 2 children, that income is $23,000, or if you had a family of 4, it would be $28,000. So these are very modest income families. This is the level, this is the financial level at which if someone wants financial aid for child care, this is what the level is. A couple other trends of demographics that we thought would be noticed. Nearly half of children under age 5 are a member of a racial or ethnic minority. That's countywide. It's higher, obviously, in the city of Columbus, but diversity is a strength in our economy. And we need to point out that there was, not surprisingly, an increase in single-parent families and a decrease in children in 2-parent families. Now we turn to some important new state policies that Bart Anderson referenced this morning, which is the 3rd grade reading guarantee and kindergarten readiness assessment. And I'm going to click through a few slides, and then Sashin's going to talk about what we might be able to do together. And so slide 10, which just reinforces what Tanny said, which is poor children entering kindergarten are less likely to be ready to learn. Slide 11 shows you this kindergarten readiness assessment and the percentage of children who are not ready for kindergarten. On the table on your left, you can see that 34% as several of you mentioned. And then on the right, that Columbus, among the 16 Franklin County districts, ranks 13th. But it's worth noting that there are 3 other districts, Southwestern, Groveport, Madison, and Whitehall, that actually have higher rates of unprepared children. So it's not limited to Columbus, I think, which is an important point. Slide 12 is a very nice map prepared by Learn for Life, which shows you, if you look at the orange, in these neighborhoods, over 40% of children are unprepared to enter kindergarten. If you look at the yellow, it's over 30%. And the green is 29% or below. So that gives you a sense by neighborhood what the need is. That leads us to this important new law, which has implications for our own early childhood discussions, and that's the new third grade reading guarantee. It is now in effect, and students in grades K through 3 were assessed by their school districts this last September. Schools are now providing intervention for students who are identified as below grade level, and at the third grade, if you're not at grade level, the child could be held back. And Sasheen will talk more about this. This is the part of the law that most people know something about. The part that they don't know very much about is the help that children can receive early. And then if you look at this slide, this gives us a sense of the third grade reading pass rates on the left-hand side in the urban communities. So Cincinnati, for example, 70% of third graders passed. Go down to Columbus, it's 61%. Go down to Dayton and Cleveland, it's 55%. If you look at Franklin County, again, Columbus has 61% of their third graders passed. So this is a significant opportunity, and I want to just pause now and ask Sasheen to look at this from your perspective as a senior state official helping districts and charter schools prepare for this.
Thank you, Mark. As Mark indicated, at the state level, we are truly working to create an educational system that is supporting all of our students. And our primary goal and intent is to ensure that our students are starting ready and leaving ready, prepared for the world before them. In order for that to take place, we truly look at this as a birth through post-secondary continuum. And as you saw in your slides previously, when we first talked about the kindergarten readiness assessment, we see that we have provided an opportunity where we're not just looking at developing assessments. We're looking at the whole comprehensive educational system. So through many of our efforts in early learning, we have, through an Early Learning Challenge grant, focused on building a framework and an infrastructure for early learning that includes providing professional development and training for educators who are working with early childhood programs. We also have designed new standards that include academic expectations, but also non-academic expectations of readiness. So our standards address not only English literacy and mathematics and other general cognitive areas like social studies and science, but they also address social and emotional approaches to learning, physical health, and well-being, so that we can look at the entire child. To that end, we're committed, so we're designing a early childhood comprehensive assessment system. This assessment system will include a formative assessment. That means that's an assessment that allows teachers to gather information and data on their students early on to determine how they can best meet their students' needs. And then we are taking what is now called the CRAWL, the Kindergarten Readiness Assessment, and we're enhancing it so that it now not only assesses the academic arena, but it also provides you information on the social and emotional, approaches to learning, and physical health requirements and expectations. We recognize that we at the State Department are able to fund some early childhood programs, but we're designing this in such a way so that we can provide support and guidance in terms of professional development, resources, and tools to all educators who are working in early childhood programs. In addition, we are enhancing and revising our tiered quality rating system, which is a rating system for early childhood programs. This is beneficial for parents as they're making decisions and judgments about programs that they want to provide to for their students, and it provides guidance in terms of their level of effectiveness, and it's called Step Up to Quality. So when we look at our early childhood, we not only are setting the stage to design assessments, but we're trying to design standards that are supporting all students. And let me mention that our early learning and development standards that we've designed, they span from ages birth to pre-K. So we're looking at it from the onset to expand it, not just about readiness. Oh.
Judge Marley?
I don't mean to interrupt, but there's something that's startling that comes out of this slide.
Okay.
And the school districts that have done the best are districts that have high median incomes. Mm-hmm. I think we could all agree to that. The ones that do the worst, the opposite. Would the outcomes change if we could allot more dollars per student? Because that's something of which maybe we have some control, as opposed to in the redistribution of wealth, over which we have no control, because we aren't going to be able to bring the school districts on the left in line with the median income of the districts on the right.
Your Honor, I think that's a very, and Shaheen, I know wants to weigh in. I just want to point out that on that chart, there's an asterisk next to districts that have 40% or greater poverty level, one of which is the Reynoldsburg district that we just heard from. So I do want to point out, even among high poverty districts, there's a difference. Shaheen?
Well, I'm sorry.
I'd just like to make one comment, because the judge is referring to costs per student once they enter school. I would suggest, because it's so appropriate for this panel, it's what we don't spend in early childhood education. I mean, that's key, and you're not going to see that there. What are we spending from birth to grade 5, which I know has huge implications on whether or not our children are successful.
Thank you, Jan. That's
once
what
they're
I
in
was
public
trying
school.
to ask. I'm glad you.
I would.
My question is, looking at the slide that you had, slide, I guess 13, that it's, I want to know, it says, schools are now providing intervention for all students identified as reading below grade level.
Okay.
What are those interventions?
Okay, and you make a good question, good point. And what I can say is that we are developing a resource list now that can give them suggested interventions that they can use and provide. They are expected to provide the interventions based on the area of deficiency that's identified by the diagnostic that was administered. So to give some background, because we've transitioned to the 3rd grade, some of the requirements based on the 3rd grade reading guarantee is that all students are administered a diagnostic by September 30th. So to really address your question as well as yours, Mr. Barbley, the intent behind the 3rd grade legislation is really about early diagnosis and intervention and support. Okay, that's the intent. And to look at it from the onset of grade K prior to getting to grade 3. So once the once the diagnosis has been provided and determined, then you can identify what is the area of reading deficiency that a student has, or why are they not on track. From there, you provide differentiated or individualized intervention based on their area of need. So then you can determine if their struggle is with decoding, if their struggle is with phonics or with fluency, and from there we would provide the interventions. We are looking at providing a suggested list of interventions, but we're not prescribing and saying there are particular interventions that districts should use from one to another.
And then my question will go to this, and certainly have worked with young people K through 3rd grade for 13 years, and especially those kids that could not read, and was focusing on them being able to read by 3rd grade, realizing that even our numbers here are showing that at least 2/3, well, at least 30% of those young people aren't able to do that. And so as we're moving forward, yes, there is a need to focus on absolutely pre-K to get them to kindergarten. But what I don't want us to miss in this as we're moving forward, for those children who are already in kindergarten and getting to the 3rd grade, because we know that K through 3rd grade is a key time for children to be able, they're reading, they learn to read if they haven't learned before. There's other skills that they need. And so thinking about this and thinking about it financially will be, do we have the resources? That's going to come back to the resources to do the work. The resources to do up to birth to pre-K, and then the resources it's going to require for those children who are already going to be in kindergarten to 3rd grade to make this work. Do we have, whether it's the teachers, which, whether it's going to be nonprofit organizations whose their focus is this work, because it does take a lot to get young people moving, and I don't want anyone to think that it doesn't. So we need to be thinking about how we're going to do that work.
Ms. Tyson, I definitely would agree. And I would say that when we look at the 3rd grade guarantee legislation, it may have initially brought angst to some people, but the intentions were very good from the standpoint that it was really truly supporting an infrastructure. It's about providing direct support to students, but then it's also about building capacity in our teachers. So when you see requirements about what is necessary in order to work with students who have an identified reading deficiency, or the fact that now not only are we asking for educators to administer diagnostics, but once you administer them, we're not saying take the data, put it by the wayside, and continue to do what you've already done. We're asking them now to create reading improvement and monitoring plans for every student that's identified as not on track. And as a result, you're using that to continuously monitor the progress and determine what are the interventions that need to be provided and are they effective. And then a student will remain on that reading improvement and monitoring plan until that next year when they take that test. If you notice, even if a student demonstrates that they're reading on grade level before the end of the year, because all diagnostics have to be administered by September 30th, if they demonstrate they're reading on track before the end of the school year, that's great. And that reading improvement and monitoring plan can be modified and adapted to see where the students are and to continue to allow them to progress. But they are not taken off of that monitoring plan until the following year, so that we can truly say that they have that strong foundation, are remaining consistent in terms of their readiness. It also encourages opportunities where when you see that the student is off track, and we know what can happen when our students leave their school during the summer, during that short time period, this reinforces the type of support and guidance that can be provided to our students so that they're ready. And we also have created a mechanism where this, although it's called third grade reading guarantee, I want you to understand it's not about retainment. Okay, because we talk about early intervention and support. But if by chance a student, based on their performance, has to be retained in the third grade, they have every opportunity and multiple opportunities to demonstrate proficiency when they move into the next year. And if they demonstrate they're performing on grade level, we try to do everything possible to allow them to move forth so that they can be successful and move to the fourth grade. So we wanted the intent for this to be, can we diagnose, provide support, but also the reinforcement around the reading improvement and monitoring plan, parental involvement. Notifying our parents early and allowing them to be involved, making them a part of the process, not just making it an add-on, but allowing them to be involved, and so that we can build that type of support system that's absolutely necessary for our students to be successful. It's not just the educator, it's the educator, the student, our parents, and our community who can work together to provide that support.
I don't want to, we just have to get through a number of slides. This is great conversation. We can circle back around. Priscilla, back to your question and back on the topic we were, you know, with pre-K education is about $8,900 versus what we have in Columbus City schools of $14,000, $15,000 per student. You know, it's been demonstrated that if we can, preventive measures, if we can get to these kids earlier, they will be successful entering kindergarten, and they will be successful third grade reading. So I want to get moving forward.
So our next slide is, what do we do before? We've talked about birth, and we talked about kindergarten readiness at age 5. So what do we do with younger children, okay? In children ages 2.5 to 4. The good news here is that United Way, the school district, and 150 local organizations have screened 7,600 children in the last 3 years in the poorest neighborhoods in Columbus. Their goal by 2014 is to screen all children of that age. And I want to thank United Way for providing this information, as well as Action for Children and Community Research Partners and my own colleague Erica Brunjan. What does the screening consist of? So here are a couple sample questions just to make this concrete. They ask a mother or father, can your child name at least 3 items from a common category, such as fruits or animals? Can your child climb the rungs of a ladder on the playground and slide down that slide? So this gives you an idea of what they're looking for. What did they find? They found that 26% of the children who were screened needed additional help. And the most frequent identified areas of concern were social emotional. For example, can your child calm down within 15 minutes after getting angry? Or fine motor skills. Could they put together a small puzzle with 5 or 7 interlocking parts? As Tanny mentioned earlier, 70% of the parents earn less than $20,000 a year. 17% of the mothers did not complete high school. 16% graduated from college. So that's 2.5 to 4-year-olds. Now we look at children in child care. And one of the things to say when we get to child care is, and this came up this morning with Bart Anderson, was the fact that there is not a common data system. There is this need. It's being addressed through the Race to the Top grant. But as we stand right now, much of the information that we get really involves calling people and asking them to provide information. And people were very happy to do that. To start with child care, Tanny mentioned this, the quality programs can only meet about half of the demand. And you look at this neighborhood, this is a neighborhood map. What this shows us is how the 100,000 children under the age of 6 are distributed. 40,000 live in the Columbus School District, for example. And the yellow boxes are where the child care centers are. Keeping in mind that some people may live in Columbus and work in Westerville, so there's traffic back and forth. Child care is nearly as expensive as tuition for college. And there are a lot of ways to measure this, but one of the things that we need to keep in mind is that for parents, there's a discussion. One of the things that the Commission will have to wrestle with is the fact that no matter who's providing it, and there are significant cost differences, as Tanny pointed out, it's very expensive for working parents. The YMCA is a provider of child care. They also provide some of the home visitors that we talked about for the newborns. Children's Hunger Alliance, recognizing how poor these families are, provides nutritious meals after school, as does Action for Children. And what do parents want? This was a research piece done in focus groups. Parents of young children wanted quality child care near their home, and a significant number also wanted religiously affiliated child care. So then we move to preschool. And preschool is typically, the differentiator here is child care is typically open a longer period of time. Preschool is typically a half-day program, but the programs locally have broken down those barriers, and they call themselves early care and education. So a lot of Head Start programs arrange for children whose parents are working to get all-day care, and a lot of child care programs are becoming more educational. 3 of the large programs that we wanted to feature today are Columbus City Schools and 2 of the Head Start programs. Columbus City Schools has 1,000 preschoolers in 50 schools. By contrast, they have about 4,800 incoming kindergartners. And you can see that these children are of various ages, a lot of emphasis on 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. And of that age group, about 40% have a special education need. Head Start is a program that helps to make the lowest income children prepared to enter school, ready to learn. There are 960,000 children in Head Start nationally, and we have 2 Head Start programs here in Franklin County, the Urban League, which served about 1,300 youngsters last year, and the Child Development Council, who we'll hear from shortly, that served about 3,200. Child Development Council, may surprise you, has programs in places like Dublin, Hilliard, Worthington, Gahanna. So poverty is not limited to the central city of Columbus. This is now an issue that all of the suburban school districts and communities are dealing with. The Columbus Urban League operates a program that, as you can see, reaches a really diverse group of families. About a third are African American, Hispanics. They serve families south of Interstate 70, whereas the Child Development Council serves families north of Interstate 70. They also help, this is not simply an educational program for children, it also helps parents gain jobs. We point out that 23% of the parents had less than a high school education. Some of them need job training. But 89% of these children met their literacy goals, and the majority of their teachers have 4-year degrees. So what about investing in early learning? What are the economics? Tanny cited this chart earlier, which the Ohio Business Roundtable has publicized by economist James Heckman, who is the Nobel laureate from the University of Chicago. It essentially shows on the left-hand side of the slide the programs that yield the highest results. Ohio, as people have mentioned, has received 2 Race to the Top grants. These are competitive grants from the U.S. Department of Education, And the Business Roundtable, Battelle, and a number of other partners here led the effort to help Ohio win this grant. And you can see some of the goals. One of the goals is, the third bullet down, is to establish this data education, this data system that we've talked about that doesn't exist, so that we can follow children from one program to the next and make sure that they're getting the services they need. And as Sasheen mentioned, you're developing this new assessment, but I think what's intriguing is they're doing it in conjunction with the state of Maryland, which, if you saw the front page of the Columbus Dispatch today, was the state that was named #1 by Education Week for comprehensive education. So I think it's a terrific partner. Learn for Life is doing an interesting thing, which is this is a community coalition. A number of commission members are involved, but they're trying to help programs assess the literacy skills of 4-year-olds. So we have the kindergarten assessment for 5-year-olds. They're helping, and they're doing this on a voluntary basis with Head Start and with the school district. So recap, where are we, and as the commission moves forward, what are some of the considerations that might be useful for you? Point out just trend-wise that there are more babies born to unmarried parents, more in poverty, more children have parents in the workforce. Preschool programs are expensive, which not everybody recognizes. Number 4, a third of the preschoolers in Columbus are unprepared for kindergarten, and another 39% did not pass the 3rd grade reading test. The good news on slide 42 is that there has been a community response. These learning checkups have been going on, as we mentioned, for the last 3 years. There are a number of programs specifically dedicated to helping the poorest children prepare. But at the bottom of the page, the bottom line here is that half of the low-income youngsters in Columbus City schools are not able to be enrolled in a quality program. And this is, as several people have mentioned, this is directly linked to kindergarten readiness. So on the next slide, considerations going forward. So as the commission considers this issue, we thought it would be useful to build on some of the existing good work that people are already doing, the Race to the Top grant and the work to establish a common data system. Columbus Schools has put forward a plan to expand its preschool programs. This came up in the Levy Millage Committee, which was co-chaired by Tanny Crane and Chad Jester, and there are other people here who are members. And they've convened a committee to look at, can they do this with community partners like Head Start, like Child Care? So that's an issue. The federal government may expand Head Start services in Franklin County. Learn for Life, as we mentioned, is proposing to assess 4-year-old youngsters. And the 3rd grade reading guarantee, as Sasheen has explained, is a real driving force now. And yet, Columbus Kids Ready, Set, Learn, these are the screenings for 2.5 to 4-year-olds, is partnering with Columbus City Schools and 150 organizations to screen all children. So there are a number of things to go on just so that the commission has this in mind. And again, I would like to, if I may, thank all the organizations that we listed that were helpful, and particularly my colleague Erica for her assistance. So thank you.
So with that, to stay on schedule, we need to move to the next panel. But I'd like to ask if anyone has any particular questions for Mark or Sasheen to clarify the information.
I do. I have a question.
Lilia?
When you talk about the 3rd grade guarantee, and this year the Common Core standards were fully implemented, how is that going to affect those students? Because with those Common Core standards, their reading levels change drastically. How is that going to affect those students?
In terms of the Common Core state standards, I can say that for the Department of Education, we are asking that districts begin implementing the new standards, which include the Common Core standards, begin in 2013-14 with full implementation in 14-15. Some districts may very well begin implementing the Common Core state standards now, but we are encouraging districts to do so beginning next year. The assessments that we are providing at this time, and the assessment that will be administered this year in 3rd grade as well as next year in 3rd grade, will be based on the existing 2001 academic content standards for English language arts. We are not designing a new assessment based on the Common Core state standards until the assessment that we're developing along with our consortia partners in PARC is available in 14-15.
Any other questions? All right, thank you so much, Mark and Sashim. And now I'd like to ask our providers to come up. We've got Linda Day Mackesy, who's Senior Vice President of YMCA. She'll come up, as well as Bernice Hagler-Cody, who's the Director of Education for CDC Head Start. And again, these organizations provide services, and children are in their centers, over 3,600 children in their centers. So they see firsthand the challenges and opportunities available to them. So first, I'd like to, I'm really bad at sitting, so I feel so far away from you. So maybe as a first step, if each of you could just give a brief background of yourself, describe your centers and the work you do, the children you serve, some of the challenges. So just all encompassing. Linda, you want to start?
Hello. I am so excited to be here today and have early learning be part of your commission's work. I have been involved in early learning for over 20 years, and I hop out of bed every morning and I'm excited to go to work because it's my passion. I want children, especially low-income children, to be ready for kindergarten and to be successful in school and in life. And so it is my passion, and I'm so excited that you're taking a look at this as you look at the whole of education. I went to Kenyon College, majored in psychology, and then a master's in social work at Boston University.
Good afternoon. I'm Bernice Hagler-Cody. I have been in early childhood. I've been in Head Start for 22 years. I've been in early childhood probably over 25 years. I'm a native Ohioan, graduate of Toledo Public Schools, and graduate of The Ohio State University. After several years of being in Head Start, I went back and obtained my degree in early childhood administration from National Louis University, so I have a master's degree as well. Do you want me to just lead into my program? Okay.
Yeah, Bernice, describe your center, describe a child, describe your parent.
Okay. In our program, we serve 24, we have 24 self-operated centers, and then we partner with an additional 34 child care partners to provide Head Start services. We serve children aged 6 weeks to 5. We serve, our funded enrollment is 2436, so we are mandated to serve that. We follow the Head Start performance standards, daycare licensing regulations, and the Head Start Act of 2007. Our curriculum is Teaching Strategies Gold. It's the preschool system, so we plan, we implement, and we assess, all based on that particular tool and that model. We serve primarily low-income children. We have a eligibility criteria list of which so that we can make sure we meet the needs of the most needy families.
Bernice, are your centers full? Do you have capacity? We talked about demand outstripping supply.
Our centers are full. We are still working to develop more partnerships, but our centers are currently full. We are at our funded enrollment.
Linda, can you, same questions to you. Describe the average child, the parent, what your challenges are, and how your capacity.
So as you saw on the slide, 2 of our programs at the YMCA in early learning are in centers, child care centers, and one is taking place in the home. So our home visitation program is for children who have developmental disabilities or are at risk of developmental disabilities. In the home, we treat the parent as the child's first teacher. We give them lots of resources to become their child's first teacher and to become their child's advocate, to get their child what they need, especially when the child has special needs. So we serve about 1,000 children through the Help Me Grow program for children birth to 3, and then through United Way funding, thank you Janet Jackson, for children 3, 4, and 5. So that is a home visitation program. Then the other 2 programs are in centers, as I mentioned. Half of those are half-day programs for children who want to attend, who may be home with their families most of the time, but want that enriching experience to be ready for kindergarten. Those programs are funded again by United Way and by parent fees based on a sliding fee scale. Then I have full day, full year infant, toddler, preschool programs. And there are 3 of those. Those programs are funded by the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services, by parent fees based on a sliding fee scale, and again by United Way. The issue that I'm facing is funding. Those programs that I just described are nationally accredited by NAEYC. They are star rated by Ohio's Step Up to Quality program, but as funding from the state has decreased about 20% per child in the last 2 state budgets, and as United Way unfortunately has had to decrease our funding based on what's available to them, I am really worried about being able to offer accredited, star-rated childcare in the future. I want to brag for just a minute about our child outcomes. We use Teaching Strategies Gold, as Bernice does, and it's a curriculum as well as an assessment. We look at children in 4 developmental areas, and we consider a success having children improve in 3 out of the 4 developmental areas. And I'm proud to say that we achieve that for 96% of our preschoolers. And so as I send our preschoolers off to kindergarten, I'm feeling very good about what we're able to achieve with what we're doing at the YMCA. I am, again, very worried about how we can keep this up when our funding sources are declining. So I lose about $40 per child per week on every state-funded child that I take at the YMCA. And I have to make up for that $2,000 a year by asking people like you in this audience to give to the YMCA. So we try to raise money to make up that difference, but something has to give. We really do need another funding source to maintain high-quality early learning in Columbus. We, at the YMCA, would love to serve more children, but it's hard to expand when the funding is just not meeting the cost of care.
I just wanted to interject a little bit about our program options as well, which I failed to do. We operate a full day, which is 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Some of our centers, 5 days a week. We also have the majority of part day, which are 3.5 hours per day, 4 days a week. There's an AM and a PM session. We have home base. We have 144 children in home base, in preschool home base, and we have 40 children in early Head Start home base. The challenge I think that we have is finding locations adequate for children who are birth to age 5, the space. We are still, you know, as you look at your, at some of our centers that we have, we partner with a lot of centers, but when we want more of our own standalone centers, finding space is a challenge for us. And the guidelines of being north of 70, again, is another challenge for us. The PFCC for our full day, which is the publicly funded child care, parents have to be working or in school in order to qualify for that. Head Start pays for the 3.5 hours, but when you need extended care till 6 o'clock, the publicly funded child care picks up that other portion. And the turnover is great when parents either discontinue working or they don't fill out the redetermination paperwork quick enough, and then you lose that, and then we're always backtracking, trying to catch up with that. We need more full-day slots, but we don't have the space to be able to do that.
Bernice and Linda, could you just describe for the commission, who are your teachers? What are their educational levels, and do you have any trouble with turnover?
Do you want me to start with that?
Sure, Bernice.
All of our teachers have degrees ranging from an associate's degree to a master's degree. We have 95% of our teachers, 95% of our teacher assistants have the Child Development Associate credential, which is a Head Start performance standard. And we have the average teacher salary is $28,000 or $25,576 for a bachelor's degree. That's average. And the average for an advanced degree is $28,168. So That's average for, and we have 170 teachers and teacher assistants on our staff. So the salary does not equate to what we would like it to be, but it's what we can afford to serve the number of children that we do.
And I would just say that the YMCA is very lucky to have teachers that stay 10 or 15 years because of the accreditation. I think when you look at the research for high-quality child care centers, you find that teacher turnover is much less. Our teachers also have their bachelor's, associates, or CDAs in child development as qualifications. But other centers who are not quality rated see great turnover, Tanny, in terms of assistant teachers. And if you are not accredited and you're not star rated and you don't require the degrees that Head Start and the YMCA require, you can see a lot of teacher turnover, which is not good for children or parents.
Because I think, as I stated this morning, the step up to quality is a voluntary standard that the state inputs, and I think it's less than a third are even in, there's 1 step, 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, and basically, just as a layman, 1 and 2 stars are really input based, how many, the staff ratios, safeness and soundness. The 3rd star gets into curriculum, but there's really no outcome based standards at all in terms of quality. But the 3 star is really getting toward that, but I think about 10%. So it's great to see that we've got some 3-star quality systems in the Y.
And we do as well. We have 3-star quality, 2, and then we have some of our centers are also NACE accredited.
Great, that's great.
The goal is to obtain step up to quality for all of our centers.
Let me ask one more question that I'd like to ask the audience if they'd like to ask any questions. We've talked about kindergarten readiness, and we've talked about 3rd grade reading guarantee. This morning we talked quite a bit about, with Columbus State and with high schools and the compact, the whole idea about working in tandem, working together, that school districts and higher ed. And so that the higher ed shares with school districts what their expectations are. I was wondering, and similarly, do we have that same working together, collaboration between early learning community and our school districts? And does the early learning community understand what the expectations are for kindergarten readiness and what that delivery is? And is there any type of transition going on with your centers, or if you could even speak in general of what you know?
So in terms of preparing children for kindergarten, I've described the assessment that we do and how the assessment and the curricula inform each other. But we also look at the crawl and make sure that when our children do take the crawl in kindergarten, that they are ready. In days when I had more funding, I would have kindergarten teachers from the local school districts come to our child care center and talk to the children and talk to the parents. And there was a great transition plan there. As funding has dried up and decreased, we are too lean in our child care centers to send teachers out to the schools near our centers and vice versa, to have those sessions where teachers come from the schools and have time with our parents and children. So that is something in the future that I'd love to reinstate, so that there is a closer relationship between the early learning centers and the school districts, but it's difficult to pull off right now.
Bernice?
In Head Start, that's one of our performance standards that we do have to ensure that children transition into the public school system. Our methods, we would like for them to be tighter. However, we depends on the relationship we have with the school. And you all know relationships are very important. With the public school that's near our Head Start centers, we take children there for field trips. We want children to experience the day in a kindergarten classroom, learn about the buildings and so forth. We have kindergarten teachers on our school readiness leadership team. So we do try to make that the best that we can. We're trying to still improve it with the relationships with the schools. We can only go to places where we're allowed to go visit. So we're trying to begin that process sooner in the school year rather than later.
So finally, what would be your dream? If no funding issues, what would be your vision for the children in our community as it relates to your centers? Bernice?
what would be my dream? My dream is that children will enter the public school system with success on their mind. They're eager to learn, they're ready for school, and that the relationship between the school and the Head Start program strengthens so that we can make that a little better.
And Linda?
I wish that the funding for early learning could be tied to the child and not to the parent's work status. When we were describing publicly funded childcare or state funding, it's really sad that I am paid based on how many hours the child is there, and that the child can be sent away because the parent lost their job. So in my dream world, Tanny, we would, in Ohio, look at the children as the important piece of this and having them be ready for school, and not whether the parent has lost their job. And so if you think back to some state programs that we have had, like the Early Learning Initiative, that was the case. The funding was based on the child and their need to be ready for kindergarten. There were comprehensive services like social work services, financial planning services, et cetera. So that would be my dream, is to have that be the way that Ohio approaches early learning again.
So are there any last comments either of you like to make? And any comments from the commission? Any questions to either of these, or to Mark, myself? Nothing? All right, so Ms. Jackson, you're coming up. Thank you, Linda and Bernice.
Is it on now? Thank you. Hello. So I have the unenviable task of being before you and adjournment today, as Mr. Fingerhut pointed out to me just before I came up. But we're going to take time this afternoon to make sure that the commissioners can certainly have a discussion about this very important topic. When Tanny started earlier, she mentioned that for many of us, this is our world. And certainly it's a part of my world as the president of the United Way of Central Ohio. But that's not where it started. I remember back in 1989 when I was serving this community as a member of the bench, Franklin County Municipal Court, that I was approached by a few folks to chair the city's first task force on early childhood education. And you might wonder why. Well, I think it had been recently announced in the Dispatch that I was one of those older women having my first child. So they thought it was, and yes, that was true. I still have the full-page newspaper clipping from that story. But I was approached to chair the task force, and out of that came a wonderful initiative called Right from the Start Community Forum. But more importantly for me, it brought home this issue of early childhood education. So as I was approaching delivering my son, Harrison, in November of 1989, as a parent with his father, we had to make a decision about early childhood education. Now, I'm certainly hoping that later, if not today, at some point, you really spend the time and to go back through the slides that Mark had, because there was a lot of just really good condensed information, and he flew through it. In many ways, though, it summarizes what we're talking about. So there's one page where it talks about what parents want to really need from this perspective. For me and my former husband, the two main concerns were the quality of care and the location of our child care. And with all of that education that I'd had, Wittenberg University and the National Law Center, someone who didn't have a problem on any given day on the bench making hundreds of decisions, this one was tough. So I had to have my hand held by Diane Bennett from Action for Children, helped me make those choices. And in our particular case, cost wasn't really the factor. It was the quality. Do you choose a home care setting versus a center? And so for Harrison initially, it was Miss Tony, who still, as I recall, his meals were far superior than those that he received at home. And yes, I was one of those moms. If the hours were from 6 to 6, I probably broke a few speed limits down on Lockbourne Road, getting from the courthouse to go pick Harrison up. So that's when I first became so involved in this whole topic of early childhood education, because it was maybe, when I look back, the most important decision that we have made for Harrison from the time he started there until, thank God, he finally graduated only a couple of months later from Wittenberg University, and is now looking for a job. That's a shameless plug. Now, before we, because the child has to make some money. Priscilla knows all what I'm talking about, don't you, Priscilla? Absolutely. So before I open the floor to some questions, I'm going to do what Tanny did and share a quote with you. And this was actually one that, from an article that she just sent to a few folks, and I actually believe that it was sent over from Learn for Life. And so it's going to quite clearly show my thinking on this. Once we stop thinking of preschool as charity and start thinking of it as an investment in everyone's future, we might actually do what is necessary to meaningfully improve the education of young children. And that's from Steve Barnett, the director of the National Institute for Early Childhood Research. So now that I have disclosed my bias, let's have a conversation. Today, you have almost been inundated with information. You probably, I won't ask for a show of hands, but I really would be curious to see how many of us, and I know that I didn't, read every single word of the homework that was presented. Oh, Stephanie says she did. Mark, of course you did. Well, that's terrific. I'm afraid I didn't. But lots of good information, and even better information today. So we've seen and heard a lot of information today and in the pre-read materials. What did you see or hear that you think would be most surprising, maybe not to you, but to members of the community? And I mean the entire community. So whether that's the neighborhood folks, local businesses, everyone. What was the most surprising? Yes, Kathy.
It was the statistic, Janet, that you shared with me the other day that I read in the materials as well, about the percentage of children who grow up and are in households that make less than $5,000 a year.
Yeah.
That was devastating.
So that statistics, I want to be clear, those are the 7,666 children that we have found and assessed so far as a part of Columbus Kids. So yes, there's the number around the 20,000. I think it's about 60%, but 40% of those kids come from households of less than $5,000 cash income a year. Some others? Alex?
I'd never thought about the cost of college being equal to that of the cost of childcare. That was a striking reminder.
Okay.
Can I just add to what Alex said? And if you think about how hard it is for us to pay for college in those earning years, the families are in the beginning of their earning years oftentimes when those kids are little, and so it's even harder for them to afford it. What reimbursements are available is everything that was talked about earlier. So we're causing kids to have intermittent early education experiences because we're only paying for it in relation to the parent's work, not the child's need.
Anyone else? Tanny? Everyone's deferring to you today.
I don't expect you to know.
I was going to say that.
I said this up there, but it's always shocking when I hear the significant return on investment for early learning, yet publicly we spend 2% of public dollars. And where we spend more dollars, and you heard Bernice talk about the average salary, what we're paying for the critically important years for these children is ludicrous.
Judge, one of the things, none of that surprised me because in what you do and in what I do, we see the correlation between poverty and underachievement. We see the correlation between kids starting out behind, and it's difficult to close that gap. What dawned on me as I read it takes me back to an earlier discussion that we had that you were a participant in, and what can we do to put the 3-year-olds in a better place? What kinds of things can we as a commission consider? We ought to be able to be treated well, but maybe we can prevail upon the legislature to allocate dollars based on need. Maybe we can try to prevail upon the federal government to devote more resources in discrete areas to early childhood because of the relationship between underachievement later and getting off to a slow start here. So that's what haunted me as I read 99% of the words from last night and the night before. And the night before. Mr. Finger.
So the good judge is almost getting to where I'm sure we want to end up in terms of what happens after today around more work, more research to bring back to the commission for some specific proposals. But some others around, what surprising, George?
Yeah, not a surprising, but more of just a, and it's not a contrarian thought, but I am completely, the data is clear about the implications of those early years. So no debate, and I think we need to think very, very carefully about how this commission takes that on, again. And I share that view. The thing that I heard from our lunch speakers, which I think we need to be reminded of, is I'm not willing to accept that it's a life sentence either. And I don't think any of us should. So I think we need to do two things. One is to commit knowing what we know about those early years and what we are all reading in complete detail. We need to say, how can we do something about that? And there are things we can do. The second part is not to say, but that is a sentence for life. I do not accept that, and I don't think we should accept that. And what are the interventions that we can do, which is obviously the work of us over these coming months. So I just would remind us of that.
Yes.
I guess what stands out to me is that my kids have been in school for 6 years, and out of those 6 years, I'm constantly hearing how the kids are first, and we want to educate our children. And so many times in so many different ways today, some of our panelists have said, and I can't even count how many ways, but they were praying for partnerships with the other school or the transportation or a community resource. And it's just kind of sad that it's a constant thing, but it's not happening. So I'm hoping that we can make those changes here too, or recommendations for that.
Yes. Marlo.
Thank you, Janet. So I'm going to challenge the statement that Mr. Barrett just made, because I don't entirely agree with it. I don't agree with it, I think.
This is great.
I think that as a society, we have for many years said, well, we've got this existing education system. That's where we want to invest. That's where we want to improve. That's where we want to see the good outcomes. We're not giving up on these kids just because they're entering school not ready to learn. I think it's time for us to say there's something different and a different way we've got to think about this. so that we don't keep putting our schools and putting our children into a situation where we're doing catch-up when they enter school. And to that end, I would advocate that this body do take this as one of the areas that we make recommendations around.
We actually agree on that. I thought that's what I said.
Agreement.
I misunderstood. So
Okay.
sorry if I was so passionate.
Stephanie?
And I would like to build on that. I think part of what you just said, that we're putting the onus and the burden on our schools, part of the real issue here, and when you really start talking about early childhood development, this is about family stabilization. And so we've got to put that, or has to be a component of this. Most urban families, they are not, or they are preoccupied, I should say, with other life-changing barriers and issues as opposed to the education of their children or getting them into preschool. I mean, case in point, in Columbus City schools, we knew, and there's a large percentage of our kindergartners who haven't been in preschool, and Carol, you can vouch for this, and Mike and Shauna, that they've never picked a book up before they go. There's no books in the home. There aren't newspapers or reading materials in the home. And so, and if a parent is trying to put a roof over their head, trying to keep a roof over their head, trying to put food on their table, looking for a job, which is a part of what Head Start does, wraparound services for its families. It's not just about the early childhood education, it's about the wraparound services for the families. That's how you begin to build the kind of child preparedness, but it has to be family stabilization, has to be a part of this work, and all of the onus cannot just be put on the school system and the educators.
So following up to Stephanie's comment with Columbus Kids, to find those 7,600 children, depending on the zone, many of the folks involved in the collaborations actually have to go to the homes because the children are not in a preschool setting. So that $5,000 household income, what are we not going to find in the home? Let's forget about a book. There's not a coloring book. There aren't crayons. There aren't any developmental toys. None of that is there for those children. So just to reiterate, now, Alex, I think you wanted the mic.
Well, I want to agree with Mary Lou from the standpoint of what are we going to do differently? Because I have not been compelled with anything I have heard today. This is going to sound harsh, and I'm open to being proven differently, but I'm not compelled with anything that I've heard today that the programs that we are, as a community, executing on are actually working. And that would be the provocative statement that I would say. I've been hearing about Head Start programs for 20 years. And maybe I missed it today, but I was looking for a little bit more spark that I saw at lunch of things that are working. And so I would just simply challenge us to, as we, I think, appropriately take this on, to take it on from a fact-based standpoint that says what are the transformational things that we must do differently, and totally break the mold on how we think about it.
And Alex, I think you're specifically talking about in early childhood.
Yes.
I mean, we heard from middle school, high school. We're talking about the extreme importance of early childhood. So what works from birth to K?
Let me just say there are programs that have been researched that are working. I will say that pre-K in Columbus City schools is working. It's curriculum based, and it's demonstrating that through crawl scores that they're remarkably better than kids that haven't been through that. Now, that's also been demonstrated in Cincinnati schools, and it's happening in Cuyahoga County. There's also programs like Spark. So as we talked about this morning, we've got over 50% of our kids are not in any type of program. There are Help Me Grow, and there's Spark programs that are going into homes on interventions on a very intensive basis, monthly basis. The kids that have been in Spark programs that started in Canton County are showing dramatically increased crawl scores and third grade reading scores. So we do have, as Brad called it, promising practices. that we, like Learn for Life and others, are bringing to the table, Ohio Business Roundtable, Action for Children. We have promising practices, but it all takes money, and we're all working toward pilots and moving toward it. Also in early learning centers with Learn for Life, intentional literacy coaches. I mean, and as I said, there's not quality. We have quality standards that aren't going into these programs. So we have to be intentional.
Those successes, as Tanny just pointed out, and I'd be remiss, in Columbus Kids, it's not about the literacy-based. Is the child prepared to come into kindergarten as the total child? And so it's not enough for us to assess a child once. It's our responsibility to find the child and to continue to assess the child until they actually get to kindergarten. We've only been doing this since February of 2010, but from one assessment to the next, we are seeing improvement for each of those kids. So,
Janet. Well, Janet, I just want to.
One.
I mean, whether or not, we've only had, today, we had a presentation that was probably less than an hour about what those organizations do. And I would just say that, one, we know we have a problem. That's been demonstrated in all the literature we've read. Before we came here, we knew we had a problem in early childhood education. Now, a problem not reaching all of our children and having them ready to go to kindergarten. And so it just behooves this group to identify what is working. We know we have some programs that are working, and those programs require more, obviously, programs do require more money to reach the children that we're talking about. And we cannot afford not to, if we care about this community like we all say that we do, we cannot afford in terms of dollars and cents to not to solve this issue, because it's costing us money. It's costing us money from these kids dropping out of school, to us paying for truancy, for us paying, our police. It's just costing us money. And so we know the problem, and it's clear. So we have to be able to ascertain what programs are really working and then expand on those programs.
I thought that this was a good point for a transition, but I see that there are individuals who still want to continue the conversation on this point. Your Honor?
There are two slides that I found alarming. One was the slide that talked about kindergarten readiness, where 34% in Columbus are ready. And the other slide dealt with reading assessment, where New Albany, the leading school in this area, was 94%, and Columbus was 61%. And when you have that type of disparity, that type of divide, then we do have an alarming problem, because our kids, the kids that this commission was founded to assist, cannot be the victims of our low expectations either. Our expectations should be that they are capable of being in this 90-something percentile along New Albany, Grandview Heights, Upper Arlington, and Bexley. And if we have low expectations, well, certainly they will have low expectations. So I'm a believer in a high bar. And so if they fall short of 94%, maybe they get to 93% and tie with Upper Arlington, which would be a good trajectory for these kids from these some low-income neighborhoods to be on. So I think that there is data that support that
we can get there. Yes. I'll go back to, you saw an earlier invitation today, Champion of Children, Jeffrey Canada. Come listen to Mr. Canada and what he has done in Harlem. I mean, that's an example of what can be done.
I'm not going to belabor it. I will advocate till the cows come home for funding for, at whatever levels, for the things that are needed to move the needle. But I never start at that point. And if I think about process then, because we're not going to figure it out here late on Friday afternoon, it seems to me that this is an area that a subgroup of this commission should actually, absolutely wrap itself around the next level, because I actually think we're all violently in agreement but then there are the nuances, and those nuances, to me, I think deserve, a focused work stream, if you will, very similar to the focused work stream of administrative reviews, management reviews of the school district, et cetera.
So let me take this in a little bit different way. I think we have agreed that we, the commission, have much work to do in this area. Let me change who we're talking to, maybe that's the word. What do we see as the role of the community? Now, we represent the community, but let's go even beyond that. And my dear friends over here, so I apologize to the folks who are being recorded. God did not give me a poker face. Yes, when I focus, I scowl. It doesn't mean I'm unhappy. On the bench, I used to turn around my chair sometimes so the jury couldn't see me. So I'll try to smile, Stephanie, and you can keep... Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, I also wondered there were poltergeists in the room around that. So thank you. And so, for example, this is just a thought. As an example of community, we are learning through Columbus Kids that the parents of the children, especially who aren't in centers, really want to be engaged in being their children's first teachers, but they don't know how. So when we built Columbus Kids, it did not involve significant home visits or bringing parents together to learn how to work on fine motor skills, etc. So it's just a thought that we've had. We've not begun to work on it. How might we involve the faith community? And actually, I was having lunch with one of my dear friends, Reverend Keith Troy, when I was talking about this. He says, our buildings are there in certain neighborhoods. Why couldn't our churches and synagogues be the place where parents could come and then we could have volunteers? Because there are some restraints on this money issue. So how can we build capacity in our community to address some of this? So any additional thoughts about how might community play a role in this issue? Yes. You always do. There's a given.
I think it's understanding the dynamics of our community. Stephanie Hightower earlier mentioned understanding the dynamics of working with urban communities and families in poverty, but even going a step beyond some of the literature that we had an opportunity to read is understanding the growth in the diversity within our community, especially those that are coming to this country as English language learners, and yet still being held to the same level of rigor and standards that are expected for all the other students. So I think from a community perspective, understanding what are the needs of our community, understanding how we can better engage families, and understanding that even though there may be a barrier of language, there still is a genuine interest of families wanting to engage, as you referenced. And so how do we take our approach to appeal to those communities and further engage them in this process of evolution?
So going back to that number on determine what is surprising, 47.5% of children in Franklin County, this is just not a Columbus City or Whitehall, it's the county, under the age of 5 are a member of a racial or ethnic minority. It is changing. I know that Action for Children is beginning to do some work. We've agreed to partner with them. So even think about this. The cultural competency of our early childhood educators. That's another whole topic, the cultural competency. I mean, I've learned from Diane that for many of these families, where if families are come and English would be kind of their learning, then for their children, they may not, many times will not be in an early childhood education setting. They'll go straight to kindergarten. So they've been at home that entire time. So what does that mean for our community? It's another issue. Anyone else on community? Yes, George.
Just a question. And it's really a little bit, and maybe it's not the purview of this group, but we obviously have a lot of organizations dedicated to intervention in the community and at a number at early age. And I guess one of the questions is coordination, and to what extent we wind up competing with each other inadvertently, of course for resources, which is part of the, I guess, natural order, but also just in terms of our programs. And what work could we do in alignment, in coordinating activity among the nonprofits and the organizations in town who really are dedicated and dedicating resources to this?
I can easily share one answer. What you just said, George, is the very reason that this community came together to create Learn for Life, now led by Steve Votaw. That was a guiding principle or premise as to why we wanted to Learn for Life, which is, it's not somewhat like Strive Out of Cincinnati, not a replication, it's our piece. But we know as a community that what you just said is critically important as we move forward. Absolutely. Anything else? Yes.
I learned of this before in some of the work that we've done together, but I think it's important to point out that Columbus Kids does such an important work in our community, pre-screening these kids who are out there around fine motor skills, problem solving, social and emotional. But around 26-27% are referred for intervention, and yet our kindergarten readiness scores, those who are not prepared, are higher than that. So the point is, it just illustrates the complexity of the problems, and it has to be more than just Columbus Kids who are actually out there identifying so many of these kids who are off the grid, complicated by the fact of such high levels of mobility, which the Columbus Foundation and others have helped us understand, but has not even been a part of our conversation. How do we track these kids as they move through various systems? And these are just one touch points. How do we get sustainability across the system?
Patrick, you're so, that is so true. After our first, when our research partner reported back to us, the number one issue that we had for that second assessment was finding the child. Each of our children has an has a number, but they're gone. They've moved. And so we've had to redouble, if not triple our efforts, to give us a phone number of someone that's, whatever it is, because absolutely we know it. And usually there's, again, a correlation between poverty and mobility, constantly moving. Huge issue. But at least now we're really recognizing it and working on it. And on the data piece, I know that, again, with Learn for Life, we need to figure out a way, how do we literally follow a child from birth to graduation? And our system isn't set up that way right now.
When we talk about community, there's something that comes to mind. The Columbus City School Board and their Family Engagement Committee is in a conversation, and it's just in the incubator stage, but there is a program they're trying to come up with and develop called the Parent Academy. And so that program is meant to educate the parents in our communities, these parents that aren't involved and don't even value education, in fact, don't even know that they should be valuing education, to try to reach out to them and educate them on what is the importance of education, how to start educating at home. And so I think that may be something that we may need to hear about, and maybe even find a way to implement that, because when I first heard about it, it was very exciting to me, because I do think that education begins at home, but we only know what we learn. And so if we didn't learn that, it becomes a generational curse, and then we're stuck.
So as I transition to Ms. Perkins, just let me share this. As we started Columbus Kids, I know that we heard from a lot of folks, well, parents just don't care. Let me share with you that what we're finding with Columbus Kids is that they do care. And they're acknowledging what they don't know. And so truly, they need to be educated, to have folks work with them on what should my child be doing at 2.5. Oh, my child really should be doing this when he or she goes to kindergarten? They don't have a clue. It's a huge piece of what we're talking about. Carol?
The name of that group is called, it's part of our public engagement, and it'll be Parent University.
I don't believe that this mic is working.
I don't think
so.
So
let us
either.
just
We've
put it
been
aside,
fighting with it.
and if anyone on this table needs a mic, let's find it from somewhere else, okay?
To even go a little bit further than what you just stated, Janet, a lot of times it is the parents really caring and not knowing how because of their own personal deficiencies and not willing to admit, they might have difficulty, reading and things of this nature. But to go back to your original statement, unfortunately for me, a lot of these numbers aren't surprising because we've been dealing with this, and my hair has been on fire for several years in terms of how devastating these numbers are. What I'm glad to hear, and that is when we're using words, as you stated, return on investment in regards to education, and the fact that this work does not have to be charity work. I think that'll be very, very important going forward. As a part of community, Ms. Martinez said the importance of understanding the community and the needs of the community. I have often thought and felt that it would be very, very nice that we have 110 schools, that they could be open all day, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, where the community, the areas, could use our schools as a resource, a shelter, where you have individual parents that might work third shift, or to be able to come to the school during times that they're not working and maybe get their GED, or maybe get educated in terms of a foreign language, that we could partner with churches in our community to be able to continue our work and strengthen the community. Because we're talking about foundational issues here. And one way to be able to support our students is to be able to support our parents. And I think that's really important in terms of having a better understanding of the needs of the community.
We've started answering this next question, but let me articulate it. Given the challenges that this information has shown us, what do you think our children and families need? And we're beginning to hear that, but I wanted to be very clear in phrasing it or stating it. So what do our children and families need? Beyond the economic piece, we got the money thing, we know that. That's a part of it. What else? Some parents need to be taught how to
teach
their own kids.
But I think all children should have the access, opportunity for education. It starts at birth. I just wanted to go back for a minute. When you're talking about the community, who in the community, I go back to this is an economic development issue because we talk about how critically important education is. So early education is as fundamentally important as college education when we talk about the continuum. So I know at the Business Roundtable, we have focused on that as well because it is an economic development issue. And we know that one size doesn't fit all, and we've talked with the governor about changing the funding formula to start in early education, not just in K through 12. So the governor has been responsive, because that's a politically appropriate way to say that. We'll hear in his budget. But I want to suggest just we have to look at other creative ways because funding is going to forever be an issue. But we have got many organizations working on it. One other trend that we see is social impact investing. We're seeing this in New York with Goldman Sachs and the mayor there, and we're seeing it in Utah where, for example, in early education, we have demonstration that quality early learning can reduce special education, maybe as much as 50%. This is one example. That if we get private-public investment into quality early education, and we can demonstrate through pre- and post-testing that 50% of those kids don't go into special education, which therefore reduces the cost of education through 6th grade, 12th grade. We can pay our investors back and plug those proceeds back into more quality early education. So we're trying to be more creative in finding other funding formulas to bring quality education, but social impact investing is something we are working on in the Business Roundtable and trying to get more interest, but that's private investment and as well public investment.
Anything else? I see another hand. Chad and then George.
Janet, I think in response to your question, one thing that we ought to give consideration to on how we provide parents information is first and foremost recognize, going back to the data, there are gaps. There aren't enough pre-K seats for the number of kids that we have. So if the community chooses to invest in more pre-K seats for families, how do the families find out about it? But also, how do they know what the expectation is for their child? So as we heard from Mark and Shashin's panel discussion, the state is evolving beyond the crawl. So it's going to include more social emotional, if I captured that correctly. So do parents know that? How do they know it? How do we inform as a community? How do we provide more seats? But more importantly, how do we invest in organizations that are doing the best job preparing our children? So the Columbus City Schools may know how their kids are doing in pre-K today on the crawl. I'm not sure the rest of the community does, whether it's an accredited center or not. Once the kids get into K through 12, the parents can get online and see how the schools are performing. I think we need to be able to provide that to families to make decisions in pre-K as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Then do we need to define the difference between a daycare and a preschool? Because I don't think parents or a lot of people don't even understand that there is a difference between a daycare and a preschool. So.
George?
Yeah, this really touched on the issue I was going to raise, which, as again, I know Stephanie touched on it, which is the difference between learning certain academic skills early and certain preparatory tools that have lasting consequences, and how do we build that in? So.
There aren't any more responses to that. Oh, I'm sorry.
A couple things rolling around in my brain that I just want to get out. One is when we talk about community and who needs to be involved. I want to talk about pediatricians and healthcare community, because actually there are some very good programs that engage pediatricians in prescribing books as one of the things they do, and helping parents in that pediatric visit to understand what they should be looking for as they're in the development of their kids. So that's, I think, a piece of the community that needs to be engaged as well. The other group that we haven't really talked about, Tanny mentioned it this morning, but it's this whole system of home-based child care providers who, in fact, are oftentimes what a parent feels most comfortable with in leaving their child, and yet we have a lot of them who are not part of any of this more formal child care system. And so, when you talk about blowing up the system or really thinking through what we might do differently, I think that's an aspect of this system that we need to continue to have some conversations with. And I would say regulation is a piece of it, but I don't believe that's the only piece, because I really think it's a lot about churches bringing those folks in for teaching them how to do this work too, and getting that part of the system.
So, Mary Jo, I think we have to think creatively. So, several of us around this table serve on the board of Nationwide Children's Hospital, and our patients are the City of Columbus school children. And, what if our nurses are providing the nursing services? And what if we have programs, and I look in the camera and tell our president, Steve Allen, that I'm not offering us, but if we think differently, we're seeing these babies before anybody in the community is. And, what are the things that we need to be doing? What are the things that faith-based organizations need to be doing? I don't know how you wrap it around. I'm just looking for, the game-changing breakthrough of thinking that seeks to leverage every possible organization, whether it's a business or a social service organization or everything in between, as being a part of the solution. If we declare this is one of the major planks, then we should be lining up 100, if not 1,000 different community partners that play a specific role in this answer.
So I don't want to share too much personal information, but Les? night, or yesterday, late this afternoon, I had a personal visit with a physician. His specialty happens to be OBGYN, and I don't go anywhere without talking about the work, including the commission. Well, I can go. Oh, hell no. I'm sorry. Let me remind everyone that I turned 60 in November. But no, I'd never met this gentleman before. He's been here forever and a day. But he had an idea many years ago. He felt that the OB/GYN folks, not so much the pediatricians, that when moms are coming in and sharing the good news, you're going to be a mother, that right then and there, they should have books in their offices so that the mothers, and start reading to your child now. And if they were to discover that the mother couldn't read, that couldn't they somehow have, and I think he used the term literacy coaches, to work with the moms. I mean, here was a man, he actually had some holiday parties where he collected books from his peers, and he says, Janet, I just kind of ran out of steam, and he says, that wasn't my thing. But this was something that he just shared with me, and that's exactly what you were talking about. We need to be more creative in considering who can be partners with us, and how we as a complete community can address the issues for all of our children. I'm going to wrap up this part of the facilitated conversation. I don't have any more questions, but I just want to know, maybe there's a point that a commission member wanted to make on either of the topics that we covered today. You've been sitting there and maybe it just didn't fit in. So if there's someone who just wants to share again a thought before we leave on these topics.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Janet, for the session. I wanted to think about policy matters regarding early childhood. We have compulsory education laws in Ohio that were set years ago that would say that education is compulsory for students whose age is 6 to 21 or maybe age 5. Now, what about thinking about that and changing that policy, at least thinking about it, to say that compulsory education should begin at age 2, so that at least the mindset for the state of Ohio is that we put importance on the education of children beginning at age 2 rather than age 5. So that is a policy discussion that probably the commission needs to have. Another point that I thought was important that was mentioned earlier was the connection between kindergarten and early childhood, in terms of teacher training, in terms of preparing students from pre-K to kindergarten, so if there is we have school-based early childhood programs and we have Head Start programs that are not school-based. So how do you make all early childhood programs connected to a school system so that there is a transition from early childhood to a school system? So those are two areas that I thought may be important for the committee to think.
Any others?
I'm probably one of the odd folks sitting out today. I represent the child welfare system. And so as I was sitting here today listening to everybody speak, we actually represent a very small population if you look at the total population of all children going to school, and those are the kids that are abused and neglected. And I think as I sit here and hear everybody speak, I think we hold one piece of the puzzle, but I think everybody sitting around the table holds a piece of that puzzle. And I think the continued collaboration will go a long way. But I think in our walks, in working with our families in their own individual capacities, I think once, at least with this commission, if I come to understand the true focus of how we will go, then I would see my mission in the families that I serve. How can I continue to communicate those same messages with the families and children that I work with?
Just a question again, maybe this is for Mark, and I'm curious about what, in the studies and the data, the implications of multi-generational households. And part of what, and it's partly a worry, and the worry is we have people living longer with more chronic disease who are going to need attention. And part of my worry is, so now you're going to have a generation of parents who are going to be dealing with this sandwich problem of an aging parent who needs care, a child who's growing up, and I'm just wondering if there's any data around that at this stage.
And what specifically?
So we know we have a problem in the medical world, in the healthcare world, public health world, which is a population of aging Americans, whatever, 9,000 people a day entering Medicare. So that group is going to need care. I see it in many families where parents are now devoting a huge amount of their energy to caring for their parents, and then there are kids who also need attention. And I'm just wondering whether or not we see any data around our kids. Now, it may be that these kids are so young and the families are so young that it's not an issue. But again, if you have multi-generational families, it's just sort of one to think about.
One thing to point out is I think we pointed out there's a range of incomes in these families. At the lowest income point, what you do see are more children living with their grandparents. But these are young grandparents compared to the people in this room. So you may have a grandparent who's 34, 35.
I was just saying you see a convergence. These three sectors, these three generations are all converging under one umbrella. I think most recently what we've heard a lot about is how it impacts the cost of college education and how that's impacting grandparents and parents. But good point.
But issues that families face, I'm just wondering whether or not this is going to become one that families face.
Any others? Well, as our time together draws to an end for today, and I do believe that as a commission we're going to do things, we're going to follow a process. And so, Madam Chair and Chairman, I propose a motion that the Columbus Education Commission directs the commission staff with support from others, as appropriate, to gather input from community and national experts on early childhood education and literacy, and develop a draft recommendation that supports the Commission's goal of preparing Columbus children to be ready for kindergarten and to meet the third grade reading guarantee mandated by Ohio law.
Is there a second? Second. Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor of said motion, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries.
And I believe that we are, we're not? Fine.
Thank you,
Am I
Ms.
finished?
Jackson.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the wonderful presentation. Let's give Janet a hand. Just 30 seconds of housekeeping. Our next meeting is going to be on the 24th, same time slot. It will be at the Ohio Union, and we will send you the Ohio State University Student Union, and we will send you information as to the room number. Thank you, everyone, for your patience and contributions today. Go ahead. All right. Here.
My children say they can hear me. I'm sorry. Anyway, I'd like to make a suggestion to this group that we consider school visits. Maybe we can work with leadership to have the members visit our schools. Maybe come a couple hours, talk to counselors, talk to principals, see what's going on. That I believe will give more information as we move forward, and you'll have, more information on how the school is really moving and going, as opposed to just hearing what's going on in Columbus City Schools. So I'd like to offer that, and I would help to make that happen.
I checked with the co-chairs. We collectively are exercising chairs' prerogative and saying yes. What we will ask the staff to do is to come up with a day that we'll meet at. Yeah, that's what I was saying. We're going to have the commission set up one of the meetings for the school at which we visit. Is there anything else before we adjourn? If not, thank you very much, everyone. We stand on adjournment.